You've arrived at the Jedi Temple not as a warrior, not as a Padawan, not even as a visitor, but as a dreamer, gently stepping across the polished marble floors beneath golden light and whispering statues. Outside, Coruscant hums with life ships glide through the sky like stars in motion, but here, inside the quiet halls of the Ancient Order, time slows to a hush, and the Force becomes something soft, like breath, like memory. Tonight is not a lesson in combat or code. Tonight, the lightsabers are dim, and the robes hang still upon their pegs. You're not here for battle. You're here to remember what the Jedi never said aloud, to walk through shadowed chambers, candlelit archives, and sealed doors that only open when no one is watching. Some say the Jedi Order was strict, distant, even cold. But beyond the surface, beneath the rules, hid 1,000 stories stitched together by wonder, sorrow, wisdom, and silence. Some were written in old holocrons and stashed away in dusty corners of the archives. Others were passed down in whispers between masters and younglings, late at night when the stars blinked through the temple's skylights. These are the stories you've never heard, or perhaps always felt. The rituals performed beneath moons no longer named. The powers used once and never again. The Jedi who walked away. The secrets buried below the temple floor. There are temples older than Coruscant. Prophecies never shared. Crystals that sing when no one listens. You don't need to memorize anything. There are no tests, no ranks, no lectures. You're here to wander, to breathe, to close your eyes and feel the Force not as energy or power, but as stillness. The Jedi Order was more than a council. It was a dream one that flickered, faltered, fell, and somehow still glows. Even after the clones marched, even after the sabers fell silent, even after the galaxy moved on. Tonight, we listen to the echoes. We follow them not to find answers, but to let our minds drift between mystery and meaning. Let each breath settle you deeper. Let your body sink into peace. The past is not gone. The Force is not loud. It's here, in the quiet between stories, in the pause between stars. As you lie still, imagine walking barefoot down temple corridors, cool stone underfoot, candlelight flickering across carved Jedi symbols. No one stops you. No one rushes you. You belong here. Every secret you hear tonight was once locked away. And now, it's yours to carry, not as weight, but as comfort. The Jedi made mistakes. They were proud, afraid, hopeful, human. But beneath it all, they searched for something gentle, a way to serve the galaxy without becoming lost to it. You'll hear of Jedi who vanished, who disobeyed, who loved in silence, who questioned everything, who guarded truth that no one else dared speak. Some of these secrets are ancient. Others are quiet rebellions hidden in plain sight, but none of them ask for judgment, only for presence, only for peace. So let go of the day. Let go of the noise. You've stepped inside a story larger than any single Jedi, one made of starlight and silence, one that stretches backward across millennia and forward into dreams. It will carry you gently, like the Force itself, never forcing, never pushing, only guiding. The temple lights dim now. The outer city vanishes beyond the curtains of thought. The holocrons glow faintly. A quiet wind stirs the banners hanging high above. Breathe in, breathe out. The story begins, not with war, not with prophecy, but with a gathering of beings who wished only to understand the light. And so, we begin. Section 1. Before Coruscant, before temples. Before even the word Jedi echoed in halls of stone, there were only the stars, and those who listened to them. on a planet called Oxto, surrounded by crashing seas and jagged cliffs, the Force first whispered itself into the minds of curious beings, not warriors, not scholars, but quiet seekers. They did not wield lightsabers. They didn't even know what a kyber crystal was. But they could feel it, a rhythm in the tide, a pulse beneath the roots of ancient trees, a hum in the wind that circled the spires of stone. These early Force sensitives came together not to rule or control, but to meditate, to breathe, to watch the waves and understand the space between silence and sound. They believed the Force was not a tool, but a companion. They called themselves the Dai Bendu. They lived simply, dressed in soft robes dyed with ocean plant dyes, and they marked the passing of time not by war or conquest, but by seasons of storm and calm. Their only temple was a circle of flat stones beneath the stars. No doors, no hierarchy, just presence. From these quiet ones came the first ones to record what we now call the light side, and the dark not as enemies, but as twin tides. They saw the Force not as a line to walk, but a balance to dance within. One of the oldest secrets, one that even the Jedi of the High Republic rarely spoke aloud, was that the Force was not always seen as something to divide. The light and the dark were not always good or evil. To the first Jedi, both were sacred. The light was healing, calm, clarity. The dark was passion, growth, transformation. To deny either, they believed, was to become unwhole. And so, they meditated on both. This tradition became known as Bendu, the middle way. And even in later times, the Jedi crest itself would be shaped like a rising sun between two wings of shadow and light. You may have heard of Oxto as the place where Luke Skywalker ended his journey. But long before Luke stood in silence on its cliffs, others had sat in circles there, teaching each other not how to fight, but how to surrender. One such figure known only in myth was the Prime Jedi. No name, no species, no voice ever recorded. Just a symbol carved into the floor of the oldest stone temple on Oxto. A being seated in balance, one hand outstretched towards darkness, the other cradling light. To gaze upon it is to feel stillness. That was the first Jedi secret. They did not begin with conquest. They began with surrender. But balance, as always, invites chaos. Far away on the world of Tython, a planet with two moons representing Ashla, light, and Bogan, dark, a different kind of Force-seeking order began to rise. Here, the Force was studied more like science than spirit. Ancient scholars, the Jedi, cataloged its powers, built libraries, and constructed 9 great temples, each dedicated to a different aspect of the Force: healing, insight, knowledge, Force itself. At the center of it all sat the Temple of Balance, where initiates were trained to walk between extremes. If a student fell too far into light or dark, they were sent to meditate beneath the moon they had strayed from until harmony returned. Can you imagine that? A galaxy where drifting too far into goodness or into passion required not punishment, but meditation. Not shame, but quiet rebalancing. Even then, the seeds of wisdom and danger grew side by side. One of the first major secrets of Jedi history is that the Force itself was once considered a storm wild, alive, not something that could ever truly be controlled. Those early seekers learned that calling lightning or lifting rocks was less important than listening to the energy of living things. They believed the Force had moods, days when it hummed, days when it growled. And so, their earliest training wasn't saber technique. It was stillness. There were no ranks, No councils, just the breath. But nothing stays simple forever. Over centuries, debates formed, as they always do, about how much control should be used. Some Jedi believed using the Force to manipulate others, to interfere with the natural flow of time, even to bring back the dead, was still part of balance if done with care. Others said this was the beginning of corruption, and so, slowly, that first harmony fractured. Those who leaned too far into shadow became exiled to Bogan Moon. Some rebelled, some left willingly. Others stayed and watched the Jedi become more rigid, more structured, more afraid. This schism, quiet at first, would eventually give birth to the Sith and to the Jedi we know today. But long before those names took shape, the most ancient secret was already slipping away, that the Force was not a weapon, not a command, but a conversation. The Jedi Order, as we recognize it, lightsabers, masters, and Padawans, the High Council, would not rise until long after this early age. But it is important, as you rest tonight, to know that the Jedi did not begin with power. They began with listening, with hands in soil, with feet in sand, with silence under stars. They were wanderers first, monks second, guardians last. They wandered not to patrol, but to understand. One of the lost teachings rarely mentioned in the holocrons is that the early Jedi believed every planet, every species, every forest and cave had its own Force song, and only by hearing it could a Jedi act wisely. When a Jedi first visited a new world, they would meditate for days before touching a weapon. They would walk barefoot through the terrain, taste the water, sleep beneath the sky. They called this becoming one. It was a forgotten practice by the time of the Clone Wars, but it once shaped everything. Even lightsaber crystals were found through meditation, not mining. The crystal would call to the Jedi, not the other way around. The Kyber crystal was not just a tool, it was a listener, and only those who quieted their mind enough could hear it sing. Perhaps the truest secret of the early Jedi was that they never sought power over the galaxy. They only wanted to understand the Force within it. They failed sometimes, they fell, but they tried, with gentleness, to shape a life built not around dominance, but around presence. And that's where we leave them now, under the moons of Tython, beside the oceans of Achto, their eyes closed, their minds open. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The Force stirs like wind through leaves. And in this silence, the Order was born not with fire, but with stillness. Section 2. Beneath the Jedi Temple, below its tall towers and meditation spires, beneath the archives, the council chambers, and the chambers of the Padawans, lies something older than anything built by Jedi hands. Most never knew it was there. Some Jedi Masters suspected. A few whispered of it in quiet corners, careful never to speak too loudly, lest the temple itself seem to listen. But it is real a secret chamber, hidden deep in the crust of Coruscant, sealed by Force energy and shrouded in silence. Not a vault, not a prison, not even a tomb, but something older, something waiting. The truth is this: the Jedi Temple was not built on neutral ground. Long before the temple rose skyward with shining walls and blue-lit meditation pools, this location had another purpose. Thousands of years ago, before the Republic was born, before hyperspace lanes stitched the galaxy together, there stood a Sith shrine in this very spot, a place of dark rituals, forgotten names, and unbalanced power. The early Jedi knew it, and they built their temple directly on top of it, not to erase it, but to contain it. This secret, this contradiction, This layered paradox is one of the Jedi Order's deepest mysteries. The foundation of their wisdom, their peace, their light built atop a well of darkness. And for thousands of years, the chamber slept, but not silently, because the Force is not still. It moves, shifts, pulses, and deep below the archives, it pooled strangely. Jedi who meditated too long near the foundations reported visions. Some claimed to hear voices that were not their own. Others dreamed of great fires, twin moons, ancient chants in languages long forgotten. At first, the Council dismissed these as ripples, memories of long-past trauma, but the stories persisted. And so, in quiet meetings, with no records and no transcripts, they sealed off the sublevels. Archives labeled under construction. Meditation alcoves suddenly unstable. Lights flickered strangely. Padawans were instructed to meditate on upper levels. The whispers, however, never stopped. One master, Jocasta Nu, once hinted in her private journals, never publicly, that the deeper levels of the temple held the breath of an older age, neither light nor dark, but aware. Yoda himself was known to avoid the lowest archives, despite being the wisest and oldest of the Council. Not out of fear, but perhaps out of respect. Because the Jedi had always struggled with one thing: how to face the dark without feeding it. And yet, here it was, beneath their very feet, not metaphorical, not symbolic, but real. The Sith shrine that once pulsed with shadow had not been destroyed, only buried. And that, some believed, created a tension, a pull in the temple's Force aura. Some even claimed it subtly weakened the Order over centuries. Others believed it offered balance, a reminder that no light can stand forever without its shadow. This secret became especially heavy during the Clone Wars. Jedi were spread thin. Meditation grew rare. The Council debated war instead of wisdom. And in that era, something strange happened in the chamber. Anakin Skywalker was once sent quietly, without announcement, into the lower levels. His mind clouded. He reported no visions. But Yoda watched him closely after that visit. Did the chamber recognize him? Did it call to him? Or had the Force simply used the shrine as a mirror, reflecting Anakin's own storm? We may never know. But even in the age of the Empire, when Palpatine rose to power and the Jedi were nearly extinguished, that chamber remained. The temple was repurposed by the Empire, but the foundations, the secrets, were not touched. Perhaps Palpatine knew better. Perhaps he feared it. Or perhaps he fed from it in silence. In time, Luke Skywalker would seek knowledge of the old temple. He would learn of the chamber. He would walk its halls. But even he, the last Jedi, never fully opened its truths, because it was never meant to be fully opened. Some Force energies, the Jedi believed, were meant to be witnessed, not used, respected, not explained. And so, the chamber endures. In your mind tonight, you may imagine it, a vast cavern of stone, silent as breath, lit by the faintest pulse of red. Not evil, but ancient. Not cruel, but wounded. The walls are smooth, curved in strange patterns. The floor is etched with spirals. The air hums faintly, as if the Force is exhaling from some forgotten wound. And you walk through it not as a Jedi or a Sith, not to conquer or to uncover, but to witness, to feel, to understand that even in the most sacred places, shadows dwell not to destroy, but to remind. The Jedi chose to build above this place, to teach themselves that no light is pure, no truth untested, that wisdom is not found in denying the dark, but in standing above it, calmly, gently, awake. So rest now. Let your thoughts descend, not in fear, but in curiosity. Let the quiet of this chamber become a cradle for your dreams. The galaxy above may turn in chaos, but deep below, beneath stone and starlight, something ancient listens. Not to judge, not to act, but simply to be. And in that stillness, you are safe. As the centuries passed, the chamber beneath the Jedi Temple became more than just a location. It became a legend, a place not marked on maps, but etched quietly into the minds of those attuned to the Force. There were rumors that certain Jedi, on the verge of falling, were brought here not to be punished, but to listen. Not to cleanse themselves, but to sit in stillness and face the part of the Force no one spoke of. Some returned changed, quieter, more centered, or in rare cases, more troubled. A Padawan named Quinlan Voss once wandered too far during an archive expedition and found a sealed archway humming faintly with energy. He never spoke of what he felt, but he would go on to walk the fine edge between light and dark for the rest of his life. Perhaps the chamber whispered to him. Perhaps it merely mirrored something already inside. Jedi healers, too, sometimes spoke of strange cases, younglings plagued by nightmares, visions of red spirals, low hums beneath the floor that no one else could hear. And yet, when brought above ground, the dreams would vanish, as if the Force beneath was calling out, not maliciously, but mournfully. The High Council, for all its wisdom, rarely addressed the shrine directly. Mace Windu once referred to it only once, and only in closed discussion as the shadow beneath the mirror. Yoda, when asked, would often close his eyes and offer no words at all. The younger Jedi didn't press. They sensed this was not a secret to chase, but a truth to respect. Over time, the area around the shrine grew colder, not physically, but emotionally. A soft heaviness, like standing in the eye of a storm long since past. Even the temple's architects struggled to explain the strange currents of energy that bent around its foundation. Some believed it was the residual echo of Sith rituals. Others believed it was the Force itself, remembering. You see, the Force doesn't forget. The walls remember every chant, every breath, every moment of despair and hope layered upon them. And in the deepest places, that memory thickens, like ancient stone soaking up moonlight. The shrine was no longer active, but it was not empty. It was a presence, a witness. And while the Jedi sought to rise above it, some began to wonder whether that presence ever seeped upward. Subtle changes in behavior, harsher decisions, growing rigidity, a fear of the dark so intense that it led to rejection, exile, and war. Could it be that in burying the shrine, the Jedi buried a part of themselves? A part that once accepted darkness as part of the balance? These thoughts were considered heretical, dangerous. But a few Jedi historians, quiet ones, scribes and dreamers, dared to write scrolls suggesting that the Order's struggles were not from ignoring the dark side, but from fearing it too much. The shrine, they wrote, was not a mistake, it was a mirror. And in forgetting how to look into it, the Jedi began to lose their way. During the final years of the Republic, the chamber fell silent again. The galaxy spun into war. The temple filled with soldiers, holograms, lightsaber drills. Peace was no longer the goal, strategy was. The whispers beneath the floor seemed distant, faint, like a breath held too long. And then came the Purge, Order 66, the fall of the temple. Blasters echoed in its sacred halls, statues shattered, younglings lost. The Force itself seemed to scream. But even as the temple burned, even as the Jedi fell one by one, The chamber below remained untouched. It absorbed the tremors. It held the sorrow. It hummed, unseen, beneath the flames. After the Empire rose, Palpatine took the temple as his own seat of power, but he never fully opened the chamber. Some say he feared it. Some say he listened to it. Others believe he entered once and never returned the same. Whatever the truth, he left it mostly sealed. Perhaps even the Sith understood that certain places are not to be owned. Decades later, when Luke Skywalker sought the remnants of the Order, he found ancient records pointing to the shrine. He meditated above it, not in fear, but in curiosity. He believed that healing the Jedi meant understanding all of its past, even the parts buried in stone. Luke's encounter with the chamber is barely documented. He spoke only once in a quiet moment with Leia, saying, "It wasn't evil, it was honest." And that was all. No detail, no revelation, just that. Perhaps the greatest secret of the chamber is that it doesn't offer answers. It offers presence. And in a galaxy so full of noise, presence is the rarest wisdom of all. If you were to visit it now, not as a Jedi, not as a Sith, but simply as you might feel it too. The breath of something ancient, not judging, not guiding, just watching, just being. The chamber would not show you visions. It would not whisper prophecies. It would sit with you. And perhaps in that stillness, you would feel a kind of peace, a strange peace. Not the peace of victory or safety or knowledge, but the peace of knowing you are not alone. That even in the deepest shadows of the Force, something listens, something remembers, something accepts. And so we end this descent not in fear, but in stillness. The shrine is not to be solved. It is to be respected. The Jedi built above it to hold it. But perhaps they should have learned from it too. As you close your eyes tonight, let that thought rest with you. Not every darkness is to be fought. Some simply ask to be witnessed. Some simply wait to be held. And beneath all temples, beneath all stories, beneath even the Force itself, there is silence. And in that silence, there is peace. Section 3. Within the quiet chambers of the Jedi Temple, long before the Clone Wars, before Palpatine's rise, and even before Yoda first sat on the council, there were whispers of objects so rare, so powerful, that only the highest masters were permitted to even speak their names. They were called holocrons, small crystalline devices, ancient repositories of thought and memory, pulsing gently with the Force. Each one held not just knowledge, but presence, the voice, the will, and sometimes the soul of the Jedi or Sith who created it. To open a holocron was to be guided through the past, not by text, but by living spirit. The Jedi Order maintained many holocrons in their great archive vaults. Most were safely tucked away behind protective barriers, humming faintly with calm blue light. They contained teachings on meditation, lightsaber forms, healing arts, and Jedi philosophy wisdom meant to guide, not to tempt. But beyond the public archives, deeper within the labyrinthine halls of the temple, there existed another set of holocrons, locked away, kept in dark drawers behind sealed doors. These were not forbidden because they were evil, but because they were dangerous. Dangerous not in content alone, but in the questions they posed. These holocrons contained theories of balance that conflicted with Jedi dogma. They explored the gray space between light and dark, the voices of Jedi who had walked close to the edge, or even left the Order to seek truths that could not be spoken in council halls. One holocron was said to contain the thoughts of Master Fanius, who would later become Darth Ruin, a Jedi philosopher who believed the Force was not moral, but neutral. His teachings were banned, yet his voice remained, echoing through the holocron in tones of eerie calm. Another belonged to Master Atris, who chronicled the fall of the Jedi exile during the days of Revan and Malachor. Her holocron questioned the idea of obedience. It asked if loyalty without understanding could be considered virtue at all. And then there were the Sith holocrons, fewer, older, deeply encrypted. Most Jedi were forbidden to even look upon them, yet the Council kept them not out of curiosity, but as a form of vigilance. To understand the enemy, some believed, one must study them, but others warned, to study too long is to become. These Sith holocrons did not whisper like the Jedi ones. They pulsed, they watched, they waited. Opening them was not a matter of strength, but of will. Only those with clear minds and strong hearts could endure what they showed. Visions of power without restraint, truths laced with cruelty, seduction wrapped in logic. And yet, beneath the horror, there was always something else. A flicker, a question, a truth that made Jedi pause, that made even wise masters wonder. Was the Force truly divided, or was division something the Jedi imposed? This question was the beating heart of the forbidden teachings. It wasn't about embracing the dark, but about understanding its place. In the early days of the Temple, a secret circle of Jedi scholars known only as the Silent Veil was tasked with cataloging and sealing these holocrons. They did not teach, they did not speak, they simply guarded, but they were not immune to what they read. Over time, one of them, a master named Cora Venn, left the Order. She left no note, no warning, only her empty robe and an unopened holocron she had carried for years. Some believed she went into exile to find balance on her own terms. Others feared she had fallen. The truth was never known. After her disappearance, the Council grew stricter. Holocrons were sealed tighter. Access was granted only to archivists with mental discipline training. Padawans were warned that curiosity could be a pathway to corruption. And so, generation by generation, these lost teachings faded from awareness, but not from existence, because the Force does not erase, it remembers, and the holocrons, they wait. Luke Skywalker, after the fall of the Empire, found one such holocron in the ruins of an old Jedi outpost. Inside, the voice of a long-dead master greeted him. To seek only the light is to see only half the galaxy. It changed him, not into a Sith, not into a gray Jedi, but into a student of balance. He began to collect both Jedi and Sith holocrons, not to use, but to understand. And in his quiet reflections, he began to sense a pattern, that every Jedi who ever fell had once sought truth, that every Sith who rose had once been denied. The holocrons showed him not just teachings, but pain, fear, hope, longing. They were not manuals, they were memories. And memories, like the Force, are always in motion. If you were to hold one tonight, it might feel cool to the touch, or warm. It might glow softly in blue, or pulse red, or shimmer strangely with both. You might hear a voice, calm, slow, telling you a story not from books, but from lived experience. A story of doubt, of faith lost, of clarity found in strange places. And that story might feel familiar. Because within every seeker, whether Jedi or dreamer, there lies a question. What is right, and who decides? The lost holocrons do not give answers. They offer stories. And in those stories, we find parts of ourselves. So tonight, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts drift to the deep vaults of the Jedi Temple, long gone now, but preserved in memory. Let your hand reach for a glowing crystal cube. Let it hum gently in your palm. And as the voice inside begins to speak, know that you are not alone in your search. The Force has many faces, and tonight it shows you one more. Section 4. There are moments in every Jedi's life that shape who they are, not through lightsaber duels or council debates, but in the quiet, personal journey they take toward becoming something more than Padawan. This moment is known as the trials. And though many imagine them as a series of formal challenges designed to test courage, wisdom, and skill, the truth is much deeper and far more mysterious. The Jedi trials were never exactly the same for any two initiates. Yes, on the surface, there were categories: the trial of skill, of courage, of the flesh, of the spirit, and of insight. But these were not like school exams, set on paper and handed out under the watchful eye of a master. No, these trials were personal. They were emotional. Sometimes they came without warning. A Padawan might face their trial of the flesh, not in a training room, but on the battlefield, losing a hand or a mentor. Their trial of courage might come in the form of a hard truth, a choice to save one or many. Their trial of spirit could happen alone, under the stars, when the Force showed them a vision they were never prepared to face. And there were trials that went undocumented, kept quiet, because the Jedi feared what might be learned if the wider order knew just how dangerous true self-discovery could be. Deep in the halls of the temple, there was a special chamber where certain Padawans were sent. Not because they were ready, but because they were troubled, gifted, touched by visions. Here they would be asked to meditate, to wait, and then the Force would decide. It wasn't always gentle. Some reported seeing figures from their past. Others saw their future selves, cloaked in darkness. One young Jedi, Isla Vaunt, emerged from the chamber pale and silent, having seen herself not as a knight, but as a Sith. She begged to leave the Order. The Council denied her request. They believed it was fear, not fate. But Isla vanished weeks later, her lightsaber left at the temple gates. Another Padawan, Thol Rune, endured a vision of his planet burning, his family, his home, all lost. Yet none of it had yet happened. When he tried to warn the Order, he was told to focus on the now, not the possible. His homeworld was later caught in the crossfire of a trade dispute turned violent. Was his vision prophecy, or was it memory, sent from the Force as a warning that Jedi ignored? These were the kinds of truths the Order never documented. They kept records of the formal trials, the tests that could be repeated, obstacle courses, Force-based puzzles, lightsaber sparring, but the real trial, the one that happened in the mind and heart, could never be predicted, and it could never be truly prepared for. Even masters feared them. For the deeper you went, the more likely you were to face yourself. And sometimes, that self wasn't who you thought it was. Yoda once said, "Only when calm, at peace, can you pass through the veil." But even he had once taken the trials. And even he, for all his centuries of mastery, faced visions that shook him. Whispers of a time when the Jedi would fall, of clones turning, of a Skywalker in pain. He meditated on these for decades. But in the end, the fall still came. The trials, you see, are not warnings. They are mirrors. And a mirror does not offer solutions. It offers reflection. Some Padawans passed their trials unknowingly. Obi-Wan Kenobi's final test came during the Naboo crisis. He faced a Sith Lord, watched his master die, and still stood tall. He was knighted not in the temple, but in grief. Others were tested through compassion. Ahsoka Tano was never formally given the trials, but her choices to leave the Order when falsely accused, to return to save others despite betrayal, showed wisdom greater than most masters. There are Jedi who never passed their trials, but still walked as true Jedi in spirit. And there are others who passed every test and still fell to darkness. Because the trials are not a shield. They are a threshold, beyond which lies the unknown. There was once a secret rite, now lost to time, called the Trial of Shadows. It was reserved only for those Padawans who exhibited a sensitivity to the darker echoes of the Force, not because they were impure, but because they could feel what others could not. These individuals were taken deep into the older parts of the temple, guided by silent masters who said little. The Padawan would be left in a small, dim room. No weapons, no food, no distractions, just silence. And there, over hours, sometimes days, they would be visited by images, voices, not from the outside world, but from within. Fears long buried, guilt unspoken, longing for things they thought they had abandoned. Some wept, some broke, some emerged with newfound clarity, and a few never returned the same. The Jedi feared the Trial of Shadows because it proved something uncomfortable, that within every Jedi was the potential for doubt, for pain, for love, and for fallibility. These were not weaknesses, but the Order had long taught that to master the Force, one must distance oneself from them. And so, the Trial of Shadows was erased, its chamber sealed, but stories remain, in whispers. And occasionally, a youngling still reports a dream of walking into that dark room, of sitting with their fear, and of coming out whole. Perhaps the Force still guides them. Perhaps the true trials never ended. They simply changed form. So tonight, as your breath slows and your mind quiets, imagine yourself standing at the threshold, a stone doorway, gentle wind behind you, a long corridor ahead. You step forward, not afraid, not eager, simply open to seeing who you truly are, and knowing that whatever you find, the Force is with you, always. For that is the hidden truth of the trials. They are not about becoming perfect. They are about becoming whole. Section 5. Not all Jedi fall. Some simply walk away, not in anger, not in betrayal, but in silence, in solitude, with hearts full of questions and minds no longer at ease within the boundaries of the temple walls. Throughout the long, winding history of the Jedi Order, there have been those who stepped off the path not because they failed, but because they saw a different truth. Their robes were folded neatly and left behind, their lightsabers placed gently on stone pedestals, their stories almost forgotten except in whispers and echoes. To walk away from the Jedi is not to turn to the dark. That is the first truth this section holds close. Some who departed did so to protect others, some to seek clarity, others to avoid being used as pawns in wars they did not start. One of the most known was Count Dooku. Before he became Darth Tyrannus, before the name Separatist was ever uttered, he was a Jedi Master of great renown. Wise, composed, respected. But he looked around and saw rot within the Republic. Corruption, manipulation, systems that crushed the poor while the powerful thrived. He pleaded for reform. The council refused, and so he left. His path would later darken, yes, but in the beginning, Dooku was not seduced by power. He was disillusioned by hypocrisy. He once told Qui-Gon, "The Jedi serve politicians who have forgotten the people." That is not justice. That is obedience. Other Jedi left more quietly, like Master Fei, an elf-like being of extraordinary force sensitivity, who spent centuries wandering the galaxy without ever drawing her blade. She believed the truest path of the Jedi was not on Coruscant, but among the stars, healing, teaching, guiding. Her name faded from the records, but she saved thousands of lives, never needing the title of Master to do so. There was the mysterious Jedi known only as the Baron Do Walker, who left the Order to study ancient Keldor mysticism. They believed the Force spoke differently across cultures, and that the Jedi, in their pride, had stopped listening. Even rarer were those like Ahsoka Tano, betrayed by the Order, falsely accused, vindicated, but forever changed. She chose to walk away, not from the Force, but from the institution. She knew who she was, and she no longer needed their approval to be it. She wandered alone, lightsabers white as snow, helping where she could, hiding when she must. And yet, through it all, never falling, never bitter, just free. These Jedi, these quiet rebels of spirit, show us something powerful. That faith is not submission. That wisdom sometimes means knowing when to let go. The Order, bound by rules and tradition, feared such departures. They saw them as loss, as failure, but perhaps they were simply growth. After all, not every calling requires a council. Some truths live outside the archives. Some destinies unfold in backwater villages, in remote temples, in refugee camps and merchant ships, far from Coruscant, but no less sacred. In the days after Order 66, when Jedi were hunted, these wanderers became legends, because they had no records, no assignments, no temple ties to betray them. They vanished into the galaxies like stardust, like wind. The Inquisitors could not trace them, because they had already left long before the Purge. One tale tells of a Jedi who settled on a water moon, teaching the Force through music to orphan children. Another of a knight who married a farmer, hiding her lightsaber beneath the soil, using her gifts only to grow food and calm storms. They were never found, but the Force was with them, still and always. There were even whispered stories that the Kyber crystals themselves would sometimes call to these wanderers again, long after their blades had been buried, as if the Force knew that their journey was not over, that they were still Jedi in all but name. And perhaps that name is not what matters most. What matters is the heart, the choice, the quiet vow to protect, to listen, to grow. To walk away is not weakness. Sometimes it is strength, because it means trusting the Force when all else is uncertain. And tonight, as your eyes begin to soften and your thoughts float gently like leaves on a still lake, think of those Jedi not in marble halls or blazing battlefields, but beneath starlit skies, in forests, in deserts, on distant moons, listening to the wind, feeling the Force not in doctrine, but in every breath, every ripple of water, every heartbeat. Let your breath slow with them. Let your mind drift to those silent protectors, those unseen guardians who walked alone, but never without purpose. The Jedi who walked away were not lost. They were simply farther along the path. And perhaps so are you. There were Jedi who walked away not once, but many times, stepping in and out of the Order like the tide returns to shore. These were not deserters, but seekers. They came back not to submit, but to offer something new. Ideas, perspectives, warnings. Sometimes those warnings were ignored. Other times, they shaped the future. One such figure was Master Jin Altis, leader of the Altesian Jedi. an offshoot sect who believed that love, attachment, and family were not weaknesses, but essential to understanding the Force. He trained Jedi aboard a starship rather than a temple, believed Padawans should choose their masters, and permitted marriage. The Jedi Council frowned upon him, but never expelled him. They couldn't, because he and his followers saved lives. They kept peace. They stood against the darkness when others were blind to its rise. In the Clone Wars, Altus sheltered Jedi hunted by their own clones, offering a sanctuary with no questions asked. Was he wrong, or simply ahead of his time? Then, there was Jedi Master Quillen Vos, who walked the shadow line for years, working undercover, towing the edge of the dark, yet always returning with intelligence, with compassion, with just enough light left in his soul to remain whole. He loved, he grieved, he doubted, but he never let go of the people he swore to protect. Even in exile, his story lived on as one of survival and moral resilience. The galaxy also remembers the Lost 20, a group of Jedi Masters who, over millennia, formally left the Order, their statues placed in the archives as a somber reminder of choice. They were not erased. They were honored. For the Jedi, though strict in structure, still understood, at least in quiet moments, that to leave the Order was not always to betray it. Among the lost was Dooku, but also several philosophers, explorers, and even pacifists who could no longer justify wielding a weapon, even in defense. Some became spiritual wanderers, others founders of Force traditions long forgotten. Their legacies are not found in battle records, but in ripples, in small communities healed by unseen hands, in children taught to trust their instincts, in temples built not of stone, but of silence and intention. Even Luke Skywalker, perhaps the most famous Jedi to walk both paths, Order and exile, chose at times to step away. After failure, after doubt, after tragedy. He returned not as the boy who longed for adventure, but as the man who had tasted the weight of legacy. On Ahch-To, he watched the sun rise alone. He drank from nature. He listened. He ached, and when the time came, he passed on what he had learned. Not as dogma, but as story, as feeling, as energy. A torch carried forward by Rey, and perhaps by others still unnamed. Walking away is not the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a wider circle, one that holds space for change, for adaptation, for a force that cannot and should not be confined to rules made by mortals. There are scrolls within the Jedi Temple, buried deep in vaults beneath the archives, that speak of Jedi who never wore robes, who never trained younglings, but who were guided by the Force just the same. Farmers who healed sick crops with gentle pulses of intention. Nomads who calmed storms with their breath. Artists who could paint the future without knowing why. They walked away because they were never truly inside. But their footsteps echoed the same truth, that the Force lives in many ways, and the Jedi path is but one river among many. There is beauty in this, and there is peace. Tonight, if your soul feels weary, if the weight of expectations has pressed too long against your chest, remember, you too are allowed to walk, to rest, to breathe. Not everything must be earned through struggle. Some wisdom comes quietly, without titles, without counsels, without saber or trial. The Jedi who walked away were not failures. They were keepers of balance. They are the unrecorded stories, and they are still with us, in wind, in stars, in dreams. As you close your eyes, you may feel them, not as voices, not as commands, but as presence, a hand resting on your shoulder, a whisper without words, a sense that you, too, are part of something greater, even if you've stepped off the path, especially if you have. Because the Force does not abandon, it adapts, it flows, and wherever you are, near or far, in silence or in motion, it flows through you too. Section 6. Before there were lightsabers, before there were councils, before even the Jedi called themselves Jedi, there were crystals, quiet, luminous, waiting deep within the heart of ancient worlds. Kyber crystals, living things, not just minerals, resonating with the Force itself. They do not speak with words, but they listen. And when a Jedi approaches, open-hearted and steady, the Kyber answers. It hums, it glows, it binds. And from that communion, a lightsaber is born. But behind this mystical connection stands an even deeper story of those who protect the crystals, who understand their true nature, and who never let their sacred power be misused. These were the guardians of the Kyber. They did not sit on the Jedi Council. Many were not Jedi at all. Yet their wisdom rivaled even the greatest masters. They lived primarily on Jeddah, a holy moon bathed in dust and silence, where the Force was felt in every stone, every gust of wind. Pilgrims came from across the galaxy, not to train, but to feel, to kneel, to learn. The Guardians watched over the Temple of Kyber, a soaring ruin carved into the desert cliffs, where massive crystals once grew like trees, humming with light. The Jedi respected the Guardians. They came to Jeddah in quiet ceremony when it was time for a young Padawan to find their crystal. The Guardians would guide them, never instructing, only observing. Because a crystal cannot be chosen by the Jedi. It must choose in return. Among the Guardians, the most famous were the Brotherhood of the Wills, a deeply spiritual sect who believed the Force was not a power to wield, but a cosmic breath to align with. One Guardian, Chirrut Imwe, was blind. Yet he moved like wind through battle, sensing the Force as a rhythm, a current beneath all things. I am one with the Force, he would say, and the Force is with me. These were not idle words. They were an anchor, a surrender, a deep, unshakable knowing. Though Chirrut was never trained in lightsaber combat, his presence among Jedi was treated with reverence. He needed no blade. His faith was enough, but not all believed in protecting the Kyber. There were those who sought to enslave it, to twist it. The Sith discovered that Kyber could be bled, forced into darkness through rage and domination. The crystal, once clear, would scream in the Force and turn red. These became the Sith's sabers, weapons born not of harmony, but of suffering. The Guardians of the Kyber wept for every stolen shard. They could feel the pain of the crystals, like a wound in the living galaxy. During the Clone Wars, the Jedi Temple on Ilum, a frozen planet rich with Kyber veins, was heavily guarded. But after the fall of the Republic, it was overtaken. The Empire carved into the planet with drills and fire, ripping Kyber from its sacred bedrock. The very core of Ilum was hollowed, reshaped, and transformed into something else entirely. It would later become Starkiller Base, a weapon of darkness built upon the bones of something sacred. The Guardians, scattered and hunted, could only watch. Some tried to resist. Others hid fragments of Kyber in secret shrines, but many were lost. Still, the crystals themselves remember. They are not dead. Even bled Kyber, it is said, can be healed if the Force is offered back to them in peace, in love, in forgiveness. Ahsoka Tano did this. She purified a pair of red crystals from a defeated Inquisitor, and they turned white. Not Jedi, not Sith, but something in between, a path all her own. That is the power of the Kyber. It reflects the soul of its bearer. It knows. It sings. The Guardians believe that each crystal is a piece of the Force itself, not an object, but a voice. And if you listen quietly, truly quietly, you can hear them, singing through time, through space, through every saber ever lit, and every one yet to be ignited. They hum in memories, in visions, in dreams. Tonight, as you breathe slow and soft, imagine the hidden caverns of Ilum, walls of shimmering frost, crystals glowing in every shade, blue, green, yellow, violet. A Padawan steps forward, kneels, waits, and somewhere, deep within the stone, a light pulses. A match is made, not in conquest, not in control, but in belonging. That is the legacy of the Guardians. They did not seek power. They sought harmony. And in doing so, they kept the very soul of the Force alive. Even now, long after Jedha has crumbled and temples have fallen, their teachings echo like wind through the sand. The Force is with you. It always has been. And like the Kyber, it's waiting for you to listen. Section 7. Beneath the luminous halls of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, far below the echo of training sabers and quiet council chambers, there existed a vault, locked, sealed, and rarely spoken of. Not out of shame, but out of reverence. It was a chamber of secrets, of power, of knowledge too dangerous for unready minds. Here, hidden beneath layers of stone and silence, the Jedi kept their most guarded truths. Not just weapons or relics, but holocrons, crystalline devices encoded with living memory, ancient wisdom, and the voices of Jedi long past. Each holocron could only be unlocked by one deeply attuned to the Force. A trial not of strength but of spirit. The temple housed hundreds, perhaps thousands, many benign, offering lessons in healing, diplomacy, meditation, even philosophy. But deeper in the vault, behind barriers of thought and light, were those deemed forbidden. Sith artifacts recovered after centuries of war. Records of Force powers too potent or perilous to be taught widely. Visions of possible futures, some too bleak to allow into open thought. This was the great paradox of the Jedi, keepers of peace who guarded echoes of war. And so they built barriers not just of durasteel, but of intention. No Jedi could enter the deepest vaults alone. Two were required, one to hold the key and one to bear witness. To open a holocron was to invite its maker's mind into your own. Some were calm, like Master Yoda's. His holocron whispered gentle encouragement, asking questions more than giving answers. But others were wild. The holocron of Master Phanius, who later became Darth Ruin, lured listeners with promises of transcendence and godhood. His voice was silk and fire, and more than one Jedi walked out of the vault changed, not corrupted, but shaken. A reminder that even Jedi are not immune to temptation. That is why the Council watched so closely. Only masters of proven clarity were allowed to study the forbidden texts, and even they were bound by oaths never to act upon what they found. Yet knowledge cannot be unlearned. There were Jedi who questioned these rules, not to rebel, but to understand. Jedi like Jocasta Nu, the ancient librarian who believed that even dangerous knowledge deserved preservation. When the temple fell, she risked her life to retrieve holocrons before the Empire could claim them. She stored them in a hidden vault and paid the price for it. But her courage ensured that pieces of the Jedi legacy survived, that their secrets would not be twisted into weapons of oppression. And in the shadows, the Sith sought the holocrons II. Darth Bane studied the scrolls of the vaults during the waning days of the Old Republic, learning of the rule of two. Darth Sidious, more cunning still, manipulated the Jedi into archiving their own doom. He understood the weakness of walls, that secrecy without humility breeds blindness. After Order 66, the vaults were pillaged. Some holocrons were destroyed, others vanished. Whispers say a few ended up in the hands of survivors: Ahsoka, Cal Kestis, Luke, and still others may slumber on remote moons, buried in temples lost to time, waiting, watching, remembering. Because a holocron is not just data, it is essence. It is spirit shaped into form. And like all things touched by the Force, it lives. Some say that in dreams, you can wander these vaults, your footsteps echoing across marble floors, the light of your thoughts casting reflections on holocron faces. Some are blue, some gold, some pulse with a quiet red, aching, humming, reaching out. You do not touch them. You simply pass, listening, learning, trusting that when the time is right, the Force will show you which truth you are ready for. That is the way of the Jedi, not to deny fear or power, but to meet it and remain whole. Tonight, as the stars wheel gently outside your window, know that within you lies a vault of your own, full of memories, of lessons, of things you are still learning to name. Do not fear them. Hold them gently. Guard what must be guarded, but never stop listening, for even the forbidden has something to teach. If your heart is steady and your breath is soft. There were stories told in whispers among Padawans, tales of holocrons too dangerous to be opened, sealed behind layers of meditation and memory, guarded by force fields that responded not to code, but to clarity of mind. These stories weren't meant to frighten, only to remind young Jedi that knowledge carried weight. Deep within the archives, buried behind ancient glyphs and faintly glowing murals of forgotten wars, the older Jedi knew how to walk in silence, to pass between rows of holocrons like stars frozen in crystal. They did not rush. They did not touch. For some holocrons responded too quickly, drawn to uncertainty. It was said that the holocron of Darth Revan pulsed softly whenever conflict entered the room, as if it could feel indecision and wish to feed it. This holocron, retrieved during the Jedi Civil War and brought to the vault for study, had remained unopened for generations. Masters feared it, not for what it held, but for what it might awaken. And still, others argued it should be destroyed. But to destroy a holocron was like destroying a voice, a consciousness. It was an act that required stillness and sadness. And so it remained, deep in the archives, humming in the dark. Not all holocrons were built the same. Jedi holocrons were geometric and glowing, responding to peaceful inquiry and calm breath. Sith holocrons were often jagged, irregular, shaped by ambition and rage. Some even changed shape mid-activation, warping under the touch of emotion. Jedi Knights training in the archives would sometimes hear them resonate faintly, like distant thunder, as if their anger or pain had brushed against a memory too strong to stay asleep. It was a reminder that the Force was always listening, that even thoughts leave ripples. Jedi archivists trained for years to shield their inner world before entering the deeper vaults. Not through suppression, but through acceptance. They learned to greet fear with patience, to let doubt pass like a cloud. Only then could the holocrons be approached with reverence. The greatest masters were not those who opened every holocron, but those who knew when not to. The vault was also a place of preservation. After major galactic conflicts, Jedi would collect relics of war, fallen lightsabers, ancient Sith texts, even fragments of destroyed temples. These were not trophies. They were wounds, memorials. The broken hilt of a saber wielded by a Jedi who fell to darkness. The remains of a mask used by a Sith who once studied at the temple before turning away. These objects pulsed faintly with memory, and the vault held them not to study, but to remember. Because forgetting, the Jedi believed, was more dangerous than knowing. During the Great Purge, it's believed that many of these relics were scattered. Some stolen by inquisitors, some buried beneath the ruins of Coruscant. A few were rescued. Jedi like Obi-Wan Kenobi were rumored to have preserved key holocrons before fleeing. Luke Skywalker, years later, would begin the search again, following threads of Force intuition across the galaxy, finding vaults in places even the Jedi had forgotten. Cave walls that hummed, tombs that whispered, trees that wept with Force echoes. Some of these discoveries would guide his teachings. Others he would choose to hide. Even for Luke, the line between teaching and tempting remained delicate. The Jedi believed that not every answer should be found quickly, that some truths were meant to ripen over time, like fruit. Holocrons were not shortcuts. They were companions. Teachers who waited patiently for the right question. And perhaps that's why some still remain unopened, scattered across the stars, waiting for a listener calm enough to hear them. In your dreams tonight, imagine drifting through the silent temple vaults. The air is still, the light soft and golden. Rows of ancient holocrons hum gently in their containment fields, like fireflies in crystal cages. You reach out, not to touch, but to feel. And in one, you sense sorrow. In another, peace. One glows red, but there's no fear, only memory. They are not calling you. They are resting, and you are not here to take, only to witness. Somewhere above, the stars of Coruscant blink like slow thoughts. The temple may be gone, but the Force remembers. Every whisper, every wound, every word. It carries them, gently, waiting for the day someone will listen again. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is already dreaming. 2. Section 8. Before a Padawan became a Jedi Knight, they were not handed the title with ceremony alone. It had to be earned, not just in combat or knowledge, but in silence, sorrow, and strength unseen. The trials of knighthood were not always as the Holovid showed. No dramatic duels or flashy acrobatics in the great halls of the temple. Many trials happened in solitude, in quiet chambers or forgotten caves, in moments when no one was watching, not even the Force itself. And yet those moments carried more weight than 1,000 victories. There were 5 traditional trials: skill, courage, spirit, flesh, and insight. But their execution was never identical, never forced, and never revealed beforehand. A trial of skill might be a sparring match or a puzzle of the mind. A trial of courage might occur in battle or in the refusal to strike. A trial of flesh might be enduring pain or facing the loss of someone you could not save. The Jedi believed that the Force would provide each initiate with the challenge they were meant to face. No simulation, no syllabus, only fate. For some, their trial came during war, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was knighted after surviving the horrors of Naboo and the death of his master. For others, it was smaller, quieter. A moment when fear offered a shortcut, and they chose patience instead. Or when victory seemed certain, but mercy prevailed. In the hidden archives of the temple, there were journals of Jedi long past who recounted their trials, not in grandeur, but in awe. One described being sent alone into a Force nexus where their past selves appeared in ghostly light, each one questioning the path ahead. Another wrote of entering a room with no door, no task, and no sound, and being told to wait. And only after 3 days of stillness, when they chose to meditate instead of panic, did the door open on its own. The trial, it turned out, was trust. One Padawan's trial of flesh was not a wound of the body, but a wound of the heart. They were asked to return to their birth world, to a village that had exiled their family, and offer aid during a famine. No one recognized them. No one thanked them. But they gave everything quietly, without pride. When they returned, the council said nothing, only nodded. And the Padawan understood. The lesson had been received. Trials could also come unannounced. A Jedi might train for years, expecting ceremony, but their moment would arrive unexpectedly. In the battlefield, in the hangar bay, in the moment they stepped between an innocent and a blade. Ahsoka Tano never formally completed her trials, yet her actions during the siege of Mandalore and her refusal to rejoin the Order revealed a mastery of self that surpassed many who sat in the council. For the Jedi, knighthood was not about title, it was about truth. And the trial of spirit was often the most unpredictable. It required one to face the self, to see the shadows that followed them, the parts they had denied. One Jedi wrote of standing before a mirror in the temple's silent vaults, where the Force showed them their darkest future. Not failure, but success twisted into arrogance. They wept. And when the vision ended, they were asked a single question. Who are you when you cannot hide? Their answer would guide their path forever. In some traditions, a master would create a trial tailored to their Padawan, not to trick them, but to guide them into their own doubts. Yoda once told a Padawan that their trial would be found in the place you fear most. And the Padawan chose to walk into the bowels of the temple, into the oldest, most forgotten archives, where whispers echoed louder than breath. They emerged hours later, having seen nothing in everything. Trials were sacred, but they were also intimate. Few watched, few judged. Only the Padawan, the Force, and sometimes a single master bore witness. It was said that the Force marked the moment of knighthood like a candle catching flame. A shift so gentle, only those deeply attuned would feel it. And when the trials were passed, the ceremony was simple. The Padawan would kneel, their braid in place, their heart calm. The Master would ignite their saber, not in threat, but in trust, and sever the braid, letting it fall to the floor like an old skin shed. Silence would follow. Then, a soft bow, and the words, "Rise, Jedi Knight." No music, no fanfare, just breath, and a new beginning. Some Jedi never passed their trials, not out of weakness, but because their journey lay elsewhere. Some became temple archivists, healers, or diplomats without seeking rank. Others left the Order entirely, choosing a quieter path in distant systems, helping without titles. The Council did not condemn them, for the Force moves differently in every soul. And so, tonight, as you drift between stars and shadows, imagine your own trial, not of combat, but of heart. A quiet moment when the path forks, and your choice is not to fight, but to feel, to pause, to listen. Maybe your trial has already come and passed unnoticed, but not unfelt. Or maybe it waits softly, just beyond the next breath. Let your heart be still. The Force is with you and always will be. Section 9. Long before a Jedi ever ignited their lightsaber, long before the familiar hum of plasma and purpose filled the air, there was a moment far more quiet, a journey inward, outward, and deep beneath the surface of the galaxy. Lightsabers, while tools of defense, were also deeply personal. And at the core of every lightsaber was something ancient, something alive in its own way, a kyber crystal. These crystals were not forged, they were found, and not found by sight or map, but by the call of the Force. When a Padawan was ready, the temple would send them on a pilgrimage, a journey not to prove their strength but to deepen their listening. The most sacred destination was Elam, a world of ice and silence, where crystals grew in living caverns, humming in harmony with the currents of the Force. Padawans would enter alone, their breath visible in the cold, guided only by instinct. The crystal chose the Jedi, not the other way around. In many tales, the crystal would sing, but not in music, rather in resonance, in an echo of emotion that only its destined holder could truly feel. Some described the feeling as warmth in the chest, others as a memory resurfacing. Some crystals glowed instantly, others took time, but all required stillness, trust, patience. Those who rushed often found nothing at all. The caves of Elam would shift, reshaping their paths, presenting illusions, visions of fear, doubt, or longing. These were not traps, they were teachings. Because to wield a blade of light, one must carry no darkness within. Only after facing their own shadow could a Padawan find the crystal that matched their soul. Once found, the kyber crystal would glow softly in their hand. It was colorless until bonded. Then, through the force and intention, it would radiate its unique hue. Blue for warriors, green for sages, yellow for sentinels who walked between paths. Rarer colors emerged from rarer bonds. Ahsoka's white crystals, cleansed from the red of fallen foes. Mace Windu's purple, born from both discipline and daring. The color was never assigned. It was discovered. And once returned from the crystal caves, the Jedi would construct their lightsaber in the temple's sacred forge, using calm, concentration, and the Force itself to assemble the weapon. No screws, no tools, just thought, memory, and clarity. The pieces would float together, aligning with perfect purpose, forming something that was not just a weapon, but an extension of the Jedi spirit. The saber was not meant to impress. It was meant to reflect. Each detail was chosen with care. Some hilts bore marks of the Jedi's homeworld. Others used wood from sacred trees or bone passed down through family. They were all different, but all hummed with unity. The kyber crystal continued to evolve within the saber. It was said that it remembered every battle, every hesitation, every act of mercy. Some Jedi claimed they could feel their crystal breathe during moments of deep meditation, a kind of silent companionship. When a Jedi fell to the dark side, their crystal would bleed, its light turning red, not from choice, but from pain. Sith did not find crystals. They stole them, bent them, poured hatred into them until the crystal cried out in crimson. Ahsoka Tano, after confronting the sixth brother, purified his bleeding crystals, not with force, but with stillness, and they turned white in her hands. It was one of the rarest acts in Jedi history, not defeating the dark, but healing it. Kyber crystals also responded to the galaxy's balance. When Order 66 was executed and the Jedi nearly extinguished, it's said that many kyber crystals across the galaxy cracked. Some dimmed, some vanished. And yet, years later, when the Force began to stir again through Luke, Rey, and others, a few began to sing once more. On Jeddah, where ancient Kyber temples had been buried beneath dust and empire greed, pilgrims still came to pray, not for power, but for peace. They believed Kyber crystals held echoes of the galaxy's beginning, and that each Jedi was a steward, not a master, of their light. The Death Star itself was powered by massive Kyber crystals, twisted by science into instruments of destruction. It was the ultimate perversion, using what was meant to protect life, to destroy it. But even then, the crystals were not silent. The Jedi Guardians believed they screamed, that somewhere in the hum of that terrible weapon there was sorrow. But not all was lost. The Force remembers, and so do the crystals. In ancient times, before the Jedi were known as Jedi, there were Force users who meditated with crystals in natural caves, letting the resonance shape their understanding of the galaxy. They did not build sabers. They built harmony. The Tython Adepts, the Dai Bendu monks, their songs still echo faintly through Kyber veins beneath forgotten moons. In your dreams tonight, imagine walking through the glowing halls of Ilum. The walls shimmer with frost and light. You hear not music, but something deeper, like breath made of starlight. Your hand glides across the icy rock, and there, a crystal pulses once. Then again, it doesn't call you, it welcomes you. No fear, no force, only recognition. As you reach out, the glow wraps around your fingers, warm despite the cold. In that moment, you are not just a Jedi. You are seen. You are whole. The Force is with you, and so is the light. Section 10. There is a quiet truth the Jedi rarely spoke of, even among themselves, that not every Jedi remained a Jedi forever. Some walked away, some fell, and some simply drifted. But within that leaving, within the silence that followed, there was often something deeper than failure. There was understanding, there was exile, and sometimes redemption. From the outside, the Jedi Order appeared unwavering, its halls steady, its purpose fixed. But within those walls, emotions stirred like wind through tall grass. Attachment, fear, doubt, all were warned against, but none could be erased completely. And so, across time, Jedi who once held sabers of blue and green found themselves far from the temple's light, sitting in deserts, forests, distant moons, not because they hated the Order, but because they no longer knew if they belonged to it. Take Count Dooku, once a Jedi Master of the highest regard, trained by Yoda himself. His descent began not with anger, but with disillusionment, watching the Senate grow corrupt, watching the Jedi serve politics rather than peace. He left the Order before becoming Darth Tyrannus. He walked away first. And while his path turned dark, that moment, the quiet resignation, was the start of a pattern echoed by others. Some Jedi left more peacefully. The Lost 20, as they were called, had their busts carved into a temple archive wall. They were not mocked. They were not erased. Their faces stood in silent testimony that the Force moves differently for everyone. Some Jedi simply followed where it led, even if it meant leaving behind the very Order that had raised them. Ahsoka Tano, perhaps the most beloved of these, did not fall. She was betrayed, framed, doubted, and cast out. When the truth emerged and she was offered her place back, she chose to walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. Her silence in that moment echoed through the temple halls louder than any explosion. She remained in tune with the Force, continued to protect, to guide, even without a title. For many, that was the truest form of Jedi there was. Exile could also be self-imposed. Obi-Wan Kenobi, after the rise of the Empire and the fall of Anakin, chose not to resist, but to hide. Not out of cowardice, but of necessity. His years on Tatooine were not empty. He watched over Luke, meditated with the Force, communed with the ghost of his master, Qui-Gon. And through those silent years, something softened within him. His final act aboard the Death Star, surrendering to Vader, was not loss. It was choice. It was peace. Yoda too fled into exile, settling on Dagobah, a swamp rich in the Force. There, alone, he shed the trappings of masterhood and became something simpler, wiser. When Luke arrived decades later, Yoda did not give him orders. He gave him riddles, stories, silence, as if to say, the path is yours now. Even Luke Skywalker himself, hero of legend, would one day retreat into exile. Haunted by failure, by Ben Solo's fall, he chose to vanish from the galaxy, to let the Jedi die. But exile for Luke was not the end. It was a cocoon. And when Rey found him, when the Force called again, he too found his way back. His redemption was not in battle. It was in legacy, in teaching, in the realization that the Jedi could change, could grow, could begin again. Exile was never truly the end. It was a pause, a breath. And within that breath, the Force often whispered more clearly than in any council meeting. Even those who fell fully, who bled their crystals and betrayed their friends, sometimes found a path back, not to the Order, but to the light. Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, spent decades as a weapon of fear. But in the end, it was not the Jedi who redeemed him. It was his son, not through war, but through love, through belief. Luke refused to kill him, refused to see him only as Vader. And in that refusal, Anakin emerged again, just for a moment. But in that moment, the Chosen One fulfilled his prophecy, not with power, but with sacrifice. His ghost appeared beside Obi-Wan and Yoda, not as Vader, but as Anakin, forgiven, not by the Council, but by the Force. Redemption was never earned through combat. It was found in surrender, in truth, in letting go. The Jedi who left often discovered that beyond the Order's walls, the Force was still waiting, still singing, still guiding. Some became wanderers, like the old master Kirak in Phila, who lived by a river and taught with riddles. Some became protectors in secret, guiding small villages, lost children, Force-sensitive orphans. Some never returned to Coruscant, but they never stopped listening. In exile, a Jedi often rediscovered why they had chosen this path in the first place. Not for glory, not for approval, but because the Force had whispered once, long ago, and they had answered. As you drift deeper into your own quiet tonight, imagine standing on a quiet hill beneath twin moons. No saber in your hand, no temple behind you, just the wind and your breath. And somewhere faintly, the Force, still there, still loving you, whether you stay or walk away. To understand exile, one must first understand belonging. And to understand redemption, one must understand how a soul bends before it breaks. Not every exile in Jedi history happened with ceremony or farewell. Some simply disappeared, one day present, the next a distant ripple in the Force. The galaxy is vast, and the Jedi were many. On planets like Lothal, Jedha, or Dantooine, stories exist of cloaked strangers healing the sick or shielding a village from bandits, only to vanish by dawn. These were no longer Jedi by name, but their actions glowed with something unmistakable. The Jedi Order was a structure, but the Force was not. It flowed through all things, and it never turned away from those who strayed. The question was always whether they could hear it again. Some could. Take Taron Malicos, a Jedi general during the Clone Wars, who crash-landed on the planet Dathomir after Order 66. The pain of betrayal twisted him. He survived, but in darkness. Seduced by the planet's power, convinced strength was the only truth left. He called it wisdom. But when Cal Kestis, a young Jedi survivor, confronted him years later, the difference between exile and corruption became clear. Malicos had not merely left the Jedi way, he had buried it. The red earth of Dathomir knew the difference. So did the Force. Contrast that with Cal himself, who lived in hiding for years, not using the Force, not drawing a saber. When he returned to the path, it was not because he was forced. It was because he was called. His exile was silence. His redemption was memory. There is a saying, you must know why you walk the path before you know when to return to it. For some Jedi, exile was the only way to truly understand the code. When the temple walls were gone, when the Master's voices faded, what remained? For many, compassion, patience, service. The true heart of the Jedi was not dogma. It was care. Qui-Gon Jinn, though never exiled formally, lived as if he were always slightly apart. He followed the living Force, listened to the moment, trusted instincts over politics. The Council often bristled at his independence, but it was Qui-Gon who saw Anakin's potential. It was Qui-Gon who taught Yoda how to commune after death. And in this way, those who walked on the edge, who wandered, often brought the greatest gifts. They questioned, and through those questions, the Order grew. If it had listened more, perhaps it would have survived longer. Some Jedi disappeared not because they lost faith in the Force, but because they saw that the world needed different kinds of help. They became scholars, farmers, poets. One story speaks of a Jedi who lived among the Wookiees, never drawing a weapon, but teaching the younglings to listen to the trees. Another tells of a Jedi who wandered the moons of Iego, healing broken droids, teaching that even artificial life deserved compassion. Their names were forgotten by the galaxy, but not by the Force, because redemption is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, like a breath returning to the chest. The tragedy of exile is that it often begins in shame, but the gift of redemption is that it rarely ends there. The Force does not keep score. It waits. It watches. And when a Jedi, lost, afraid, unsure, takes one small step back toward the light, the Force embraces them. No questions, just warmth. Think of Rey, born without a surname, without a master, yet finding the Jedi path in her own way. Her learning was messy, non-linear. She fell. She doubted. But she listened. She felt. She chose. And in the ruins of what the Jedi once were, she became what they could be. A Jedi not of the past, but of possibility. Luke's final lesson to her was not in combat. It was in letting go, in trusting herself. And in this way, even those who lived in exile their whole lives, like Luke, like Yoda, passed on not rules, but wisdom. Redemption is rarely a return. It is a rebirth. The greatest Jedi stories do not end in battle. They end in surrender, in peace, in that final moment of truth where one sets down the saber and becomes whole. As you drift towards sleep now, imagine sitting beneath a starry sky on a forgotten world. The fire before you flickers. Your robes are dusty. Your saber is buried beneath your cloak, and the Force hums. You do not need to fight, or run, or prove anything. You are not a master. You are not a Padawan. You are simply present. And the Force, ever patient, ever gentle, wraps around your soul like a lullaby. You are not lost. You are on your way home. Section 11. There is a rhythm to the Jedi Code, a gentle heartbeat of words that echo across generations. It is not a law, not a cage, but a mantra recited in quiet halls, whispered in the silence between thoughts, and etched into the minds of Padawans as they begin their lifelong journey. There is no emotion, there is peace. With this first line, the Jedi begin not by rejecting emotion, but by choosing to look past its storm. Emotions arise, fear, anger, joy, love. But a Jedi does not let them rule. They feel them, acknowledge them, and let them go, like wind passing through tall grass. Peace is not the absence of feeling. It is the stillness that remains after the wave crashes. In the training chambers of Coruscant, younglings would sit cross-legged, their eyes closed, learning to breathe through their fears, to let go of distractions, to find peace not in victory, but in quiet. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. The Jedi seek understanding, not control, not judgment. The galaxy is vast, and no one can know all its truths. But a Jedi listens. A Jedi studies. A Jedi walks into the unknown, not with arrogance, but with humility. Archives spanning thousands of worlds sat beneath the temple, and Jedi archivists preserve stories, rituals, languages, forgotten myths. Not because they held power, but because every fragment of truth added to the whole. Knowledge for the Jedi is not about answers. It is about questions. It is about curiosity. Even the Masters continue to learn, especially the Masters. There is no passion. There is serenity. Passion, wild and blinding, can lead even the noblest heart astray. A Jedi loves, but does not cling. They act with conviction, but not obsession. Serenity is the light within the storm, the clarity that lets a Jedi act not from desire, but from purpose. When Mace Windu deflected a dozen attacks with a single calm breath, when Aayla Secura stood firm amid chaos on Felucia, when Obi-Wan chose mercy over vengeance, these were acts of serenity, not passivity. The Jedi do not reject passion, they rise above it. They recognize that true power lies in restraint, in balance. There is no chaos, there is harmony. The galaxy spins with conflict, wars, betrayals, shifting tides of politics and pride. But the Force weaves through it all with purpose. Even in the darkest hour, there is a pattern, a flow, a balance waiting to be restored. Jedi are not here to force peace. They are here to listen for its melody, to guide others back into harmony. When Yoda meditated during the Clone Wars, even as the Republic crumbled, he reminded the Council, "See not the battle, see the Force." Harmony is not silence, it is a choir, and the Jedi are just one voice within it. There is no death, there is the Force. Perhaps the most mysterious line, and the most comforting. For Jedi, death is not an end, but a return. The body fades, the spirit flows back into the river of the Force, becoming one with all things. Some Jedi, like Qui-Gon, Yoda, Obi-Wan, Anakin, learned how to linger, how to remain not as ghosts, but as guides. But even those who vanish entirely are never truly gone. Their presence lingers in the rustle of leaves, in the pulse of stars, in the quiet between breaths. Jedi funerals are not mournful, they are reflective. A candle is lit, a name is spoken, and the Force is thanked for the time shared. Because in the end, all Jedi return to where they came from. They are the Force, always were, always will be. The code, when spoken aloud, has a rhythm, gentle, flowing, but it is not a spell, it is a mirror. Each Jedi sees themselves in its lines differently. Some recite it daily, some only in moments of doubt, some question it entirely. And that too is part of being Jedi. For the code was never meant to imprison thought. It was meant to center it. It is not a command. It is a whisper, a compass in the dark. A way to remember who you are when the galaxy tries to make you forget. Many Jedi add their own verses in private, lines they carry in their hearts. Some say, through compassion, I gain strength. Others, the light shines brightest in shadow. These are not canon, but they are true. For the Jedi way is not rigid. It breathes, it evolves, it listens. Tonight, as you listen to the quiet hum of these ancient words, let your thoughts soften. Let your breath slow. You do not need to remember the whole code, just its feeling, its warmth. You are not emotion. You are peace. You are not ignorance. You are knowledge. You are not chaos. You are harmony. You are not death. You are the Force. Let that truth wrap around you like a robe of starlight. Let it carry you into rest. Ignasis Digi, Section 12. Even when the temples fall, the legacy remains. Not in stone, not in archives, but in memory. In quiet acts of kindness passed between generations like candles lit in the dark. When the Jedi Temple on Coruscant crumbled under the weight of war and betrayal, many believed the Jedi were gone forever. Their robes were scattered, their sabers lost, their teachings whispered only in hidden corners of the galaxy. But the Force does not forget, and neither do those whose lives were touched by Jedi hands. On a farm in Lothal, a mother told her children bedtime stories of a warrior in white who helped their village long ago, never asking for anything in return. On the snowy world of Ilum, once a sacred place where younglings gathered their kyber crystals, the wind still sings softly through its caves, as if reciting the prayers of those who once passed through. In forgotten corners of the galaxy, murals still glow with faded images of Jedi standing tall beside the people, not above them, not apart from them, but with them. This is the true legacy of the Jedi, not their battles, not their titles, but their choices. Every time a child is taught to be brave without anger, every time someone offers peace before striking, every time a lost traveler is shown compassion, the Jedi live again. Luke Skywalker understood this when he stood alone against the First Order on Crate, not to destroy, but to delay, not to strike, but to inspire. His presence was legend, but his purpose was peace. Rey, holding the weight of the past in her hands, chose not just to fight, but to listen, to learn, to become something new. She carried the memory of every Jedi who came before, not to replicate them, but to evolve them. And in doing so, she became their legacy. Grogu, the small child touched by war, but nurtured by quiet care, represents a different kind of Jedi path, one that blends love with power, instinct with discipline. He does not speak the code, but he feels its essence. Ezra Bridger, from the streets of Lothal to the ancient temples of the unknown regions, proved that a Jedi's strength lies not in how they fight, but in what they're willing to sacrifice for others. Kanan Jarrus, once a runaway from the ruins of Order 66, became a teacher, a friend, a guardian. His final act was not one of fury, but of light, guiding others toward hope even as his own journey ended. These are the ripples, the echoes, the quiet, enduring presence of the Jedi after the storm. When the last datapad is erased, when the final saber hum fades into silence, the Jedi still remain. In the songs sung by travelers, in the rituals of healers, in the decisions made at crossroads when anger tempts and mercy answers. Legacy is not built in grand gestures. It is passed in whispers, in choices. The Jedi were not perfect. Their order fell. Their pride cracked. But within that fall was the seed of something deeper. A return to truth, to simplicity, to presence. The legacy of the Jedi is not in what they lost, but in what they left behind. The Force, ever flowing, carries their essence forward, not as commanders of armies, but as keepers of peace, as listeners, as guides. Imagine now a world long after the Jedi are gone. No temples, no holocrons, just a child, sitting beneath a tree, feeling something quiet in the wind, a sense of stillness, of wonder, of light. That is the Jedi. That is what remains. The Jedi Order may have crumbled under the weight of its own rigidity, but its essence, like the Force itself, could never be contained by walls or erased by war. What survived was not an institution, but a whisper, a shared breath between generations. There are children across the galaxy who play with sticks, pretending they are lightsabers, not because they understand the politics of the Republic or the tragedies of the Clone Wars, but because they heard stories of peacekeepers who walked without armor, of warriors who chose restraint, of monks who could lift starships with a glance but preferred lifting hearts with presence. And so the legacy of the Jedi lingers not just in temples or tales, but in the small moments. A stranger offering food in a war-torn city, a healer using the Force to soothe a wound, a lonely pilot looking up at the stars and wondering what it means to do what's right, even when it's hard. In the depths of the galaxy, holocrons, ancient memory crystals filled with the wisdom of Jedi past, still wait in hidden vaults, not as weapons, but as beacons. They do not shout, they hum softly, waiting for someone worthy, someone open-hearted enough to listen. In the wilds of Dagobah, where Yoda spent his final years, the vines have wrapped around his hut, but the presence remains, still, watchful, peaceful. And in the deep ice of Ilum, now scarred and reshaped, the light of Kyber crystals flickers beneath the snow, like heartbeat embers that refuse to die. The Jedi Order's fall was never its end. It was a rebirth. Because with the Order gone, only the truth remained, that a Jedi is not their robe, not their title, not their counsel. A Jedi is a choice made over and over in the face of pain, fear, anger, and loss. To love without attachment, to help without pride, to fight without hate. When Luke faced the temptation to strike down his father, he chose mercy. And in that moment, he became more Jedi than any decree could name. When Rey faced the shadows of identity, of lineage, of doubt, and still stood for the light, she did not just carry the Jedi legacy, she shaped it anew. The Force itself is not Jedi. It is not Sith. It is not sides and sabers. It is life, energy, connection. The Jedi were merely those who chose to listen to its call with calm hearts and open minds. And even when they fell, that call never stopped echoing. Some say that a new Jedi Order may one day rise, not with grand halls and thousands of knights, but with quiet steps, guided by love and wisdom rather than dogma and fear. Perhaps it will be one. Perhaps it will be many. But its foundation will not be power. It will be purpose. In the silence after war, in the calm that follows chaos, the legacy of the Jedi finds fertile ground. In stories passed between generations, in hollow books preserved by librarians, in the calm breath of a child learning to meditate. You see, what remains of the Jedi is not relic, it is rhythm. The rhythm of choosing peace when war is easier, of listening before speaking, of seeing light where others see only shadow. Every act of compassion is a Jedi teaching reborn. Every act of hope is a saber reignited. And so, even now, across the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the Jedi continue, not as ghosts, but as memories that guide, as sparks that light the way. And as you lay here, eyes closed, breathing steady, you too carry that legacy, not in grand gestures, not in force powers, but in kindness, in stillness, in the belief that even when everything seems lost, the light is never truly gone. It waits, it watches, and it rises again. That is the legacy of the Jedi, and tonight, it is yours too. Outro. And so, we come to the end of this journey, but not to the end of the Jedi, because the Jedi are never truly gone. Not in this galaxy, not in your dreams, and not in your heart. You've walked with them from the ancient temples hidden in the stars to the quiet breaths of their final moments. You've listened to their truths and their doubts, their triumphs and their failures, their secrets buried beneath stone and time. You've felt their presence through quiet codes, forgotten ruins, whispered names, and the low hum of lightsabers never raised in anger, only in resolve. The Jedi were not perfect, but they tried. They loved in silence. They served in shadows. And above all, they believed in balance, in peace, in the possibility that there was always another way. Tonight, you carried that belief with you. You wandered through time with the first Jedi who felt the Force like wind in their lungs. You stood at the gates of the great temple and heard the soft shuffle of robes echoing through its endless halls. You sat with younglings, laughter echoing like stars twinkling in a chamber of light. You studied the Jedi Code, its strict rules, and the tender cracks where humanity slipped through. You watched masters and Padawans drift together, not always in harmony, but always in hope. You saw the secrets carved beneath the floors, hidden in holocrons, guarded by sentinels who no longer had names. You witnessed Jedi lose their way, break their vows, question their teachings, and still, they searched for the light. Because the light was never something they held, it was something they followed. You stood silently in the council chambers when decisions were made, some wise, some grave. You felt the wind shift on Geonosis. You watched Order 66 descend like a storm. But even in that silence, you never lost sight of what came next. You found them again in the ashes, in exile, in children, in memory, in stories. The Jedi Order fell, but the Jedi way endured. You felt it in Luke Skywalker's doubt and in his peace, in Rey's questions and in her quiet answer, in Ahsoka's choice to walk away from the Order, yet carry its values in her soul, in Grogu's gentle stillness, in the final spark of Anakin's return to light, in each act of kindness, of restraint, of courage. That is what the Jedi are. That is what they leave behind. And now the stars grow dim. The temple lights fade. The sabers are quiet. But your heart is full. You carry every echo with you, every secret, every sorrow, every shimmer of peace. So as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, remember, the Jedi never needed sleep. But you do, and the Force will watch over you. Tonight you are safe. Tonight you are home. And as you drift off, just know, the story never truly ends. The Jedi will return, in the stars, in the stories, in the silence. May peace be with you, and may the Force be with you, always.